Thanks for joining us today. I'm Gabe Garish, owner of Backwoods Pursuit, and today we're going to do a Biolite headlamp review and comparison. We've got the Biolite 800 Pro headlamp, the Biolite 425 headlamp, and the Biolite 325 headlamp. They're all a little bit different in their performance and their specs, and so we're going to go over all of those features and the differences there and what might sway you in one direction or another if you're looking at the Biolite headlamps. Always appreciate it if you hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us on our Facebook and Instagram channels. I'll put links to all that down in the description, as well as a link to these Biolite headlamps so you can check them out for yourself. Let's get started. All right, let's start off with getting into some of the specs and differences here that way between these three headlamps. The Biolite 325 headlamp features 325 lumens, same with the 425 and the 800. That's kind of in the naming convention. So 425 max and 800 max lumens. Now, one thing to note on the 800 though is that 800 max lumens is just based on a turbo mode, whereas the high beam is a 500 lumens max. So if you turn that on, there's a button here on the battery pack on the back that if you hit that, that puts it into a turbo mode that is just a short 30-minute burst there, and then it'll automatically turn off so it doesn't burn your battery too much. So that is a very nice thing if you need to light something up briefly, but it's not going to burn your battery up because that turbo mode does burn a lot of battery very quickly. So that's one difference there. Another really cool feature with all of them is that they are all dimmable, which is great. It gives you that in between if you just don't want a low, medium, or high. If one of those isn't quite what you're looking for, you can hold down that button and it dims from the maximum lumens down to the minimum. Push it down again after you've let the button up and it'll take you back up to the maximum. So that is really nice. Each of them does have various settings as far as with or without the main beam, except for the 325. You just have the one main beam and then a red light. They all do feature a red light, which is really nice also. And they all have the articulating head here, which we'll get into a little bit more in a minute, but they do all have that adjustment, which is real nice. Now, as far as batteries, you've got 700 milliamps on the 325, so it's not going to last as long versus the 1000 and the 3000 milliamps of the 800 and the 425. So you definitely get the best battery life out of the 800, but it's also the heaviest, which is pretty typical with this type of situation. You have a rear light, which is going to be a really nice feature if you're running or on a bike ride. So the 425 and the 800 all give you this red light, and it's either blinking or a solid. So it depends on what you want there. So that's featured in both the 800 and the 425, whereas the 325 does not have that rear light. Now, the offset to that, the weights here on the 325, we've got 1.75 ounces for the 325. The 425 with that battery on the back is 2.75 ounces, and the 800 comes in at 5.3 ounces. So all of them are still very lightweight, but you do have a really, really lightweight headlamp here in that 325, primarily because the battery is there in the front and it's a much smaller battery than the other two. Still really lightweight on the 425 also though. Now, one other really cool feature that both the 425 and the 800 have is that they feature what they call the Run Forever option. So you have the ability to plug these in while you're using the headlamp with one of the included cables here, and you can plug it into one of their PD series, so PD 20, 40, or 80, depending on how much power you need. Most likely that PD 20 is going to be plenty for a headlamp, but you can plug that in while you're using it and then put the power source, say, in a backpack or a shirt pocket or something of that nature. And then that's going to run as long as that external battery source is going to run, so much, much longer than the small batteries included here. Now, as far as run times are concerned, we tested all of these and put these out in the backyard here and did a time-lapse video. So the 325 here lasted about what they stated, that 3-hour mark before it shut off. Now, it does not have a reserve mode, so when it shuts off, it just dies. So the 425 here lasted at just about that 4 hours, just before the 4-hour mark, like they stated in their specs, so that was accurate there. Now, the 800 here is particularly impressive in how it lasted, as you can see, all throughout the night and then into the morning, so we went ahead and shut it off. Next day here, we went ahead and turned it back on throughout the day just to see how long it would last in that reserve mode. and then did that for a couple of days straight. And the result was it lasted over 32 more hours before it died and shut off. So it would give you that low output of that 5 lumens for over 32 hours after that first night, and it didn't even kick into that reserve mode in that during the evening's use. You could see it was really bright still throughout the entire night, and then lasted another 32 hours after that before it completely died. So really impressive. Now that's in one of the 2 modes that 800 offers. That's the typical headlamp style mode, but it also offers you a constant mode by holding down the button on the back here. And what that's going to do is give you a constant brightness, whatever you set it at, until the battery is dead. So if you want really consistent lighting and you don't care about having that life longevity of the battery, switch this over to constant mode and you're going to have that 500 lumens of the max lumens, and it has a different runtime for each of those, of course, based on if you're in constant mode or your standard mode. So that's one thing that's really cool about the 800. That 3000 milliamp battery really does a good job of holding on to a charge a really long time and giving you long battery life, particularly if you are in standard mode. Now, a couple of physical features that are interesting that I noted here. The 425 and the 800 here, of course, both have the battery pack on the back of the head. Some people like that, some people don't. I typically am not a fan of that for my particular purposes. Unless I'm riding a bike or doing a run, something of that nature. These are super comfortable with that the battery on the back of the headband. So it didn't bother me in those situations, but if I'm in a hunting type of a situation, hiking and backpacking, I prefer to have that all in the front. So for those purposes, I do prefer something like the 325 where it's all there in the front and you have less of the cords here that are involved with the 425 and the 800 that are on the side of the headband. It just seems like when I'm in those situations, I want less of that going on the side because you've got more gear that you're working with, a backpack and everything else coming in and out of the backpack, that is a little bit more cumbersome. So for that reason, in those situations, I don't as much prefer that battery pack on the back of the head versus the front. But that's the way that these differences in the design are, but it does make them very balanced in the way they sit on your head, and this being on the material they use here and the way that this spreads the weight out on their headband does a really good job of being comfortable regardless of which one you go with. Now, one other thing that I found that was quite interesting is that the 800 and the 325 both use a micro USB to charge, whereas the 425 uses a USB-C type of cord to charge. I prefer the USB-C because I have more devices that are going to use that, and so I don't have to bring that extra micro cable, which I don't use on really much of anything anymore. But that is the way that you charge these. So if you're going to take one of these and want to charge them out in the field, if you're backpacking or hiking or that sort of thing, that's going to be what you want to take with those. Not a bad idea as well to pick up one of these Biolite solar panels. This is the 5 watt and then the 10 watt. If you're going to be out backpacking for a while, you get some nice charges out of there, and these have a built-in 3200 milliamp battery as well. Those are really nice if you're going to need multiple charges, whether it's your other devices like your phone or something of that nature, but they'll charge these headlamps really well also just by using them directly into these. So that's a good option as well if you're going to be out for multiple days on, say, something like a backpacking trip. Now, a couple other interesting performance notes. I used all of these in some really cold temperatures on some winter hikes. Here the temperatures were single digits Fahrenheit, so very cold, and they perform flawlessly. Both the 800 and the 425 give you spot and flood beams, whereas the 325 does not. But I found that the spot beams were not really concentrated. Some spot beams out there are really super concentrated and not particularly useful unless you're wanting to look at something really far away. But these are a nice balance between that spot and the flood, and you have the option to run either spot or the flood or both at the same time with the 425 and 800. So they do a real good job that way, and I really like the color temperature of all of these. They're real pleasant to the eye and not real harsh when you're out hiking. So that's something I really liked about these. Another interesting thing is that they all blink when they're getting low on battery. So if you're out using these and you see it blink once, it's telling you the battery's starting to get low, which is a nice indicator that, hey, you're going to have to charge this pretty soon. All right, now some of the pros and cons that I found after using each of these. They're all super lightweight. I really like that feature. That's something that's really critical if you're backpacking, and it is really nice if you're running or biking as well. You don't like a big heavy headlamp, and they all come through in that regard. Of course, at just over 5 ounces, this 800 is a little on the heavier side, but it's really, really well balanced, and you get a ton of runtime. I typically don't like that battery pack in the back because it tends to be something that is really quite heavy or uncomfortable, but they do a really good job with the design of these headlamps, with the cordage integrated into that headband to be really, really comfortable and provide you with a lot of charge and a lot of battery life in a package that is really not that heavy considering what you get there. Same with the 425 battery pack in the back. Don't typically love that, but it does give you a particularly comfortable headlamp, and the 325 is just ridiculously lightweight at under 2 ounces. Something you could throw in your backpack as a backup light, or it's bright enough even at 325 lumens to be your primary headlamp. It just isn't going to last very long because of that smaller battery. So lightweight is a great feature, comfortable headband. Both the 425 and 800 give you that rear red light, which is really nice if you're biking or running. So a really nice feature there. And both the 425 and the 800 give you a battery indicator on the back. It just push the button, it tells you how much battery is left. So that is really nice also. They all have pretty impressive battery life, particularly for their size and their weight. And I'd say particularly the 800 here, as long as it lasted with that reserve mode in the standard overall mode, kicking into reserve mode really gives you a ton of battery life. It's a really good safety feature if you find yourself lost, unfortunately, or something of that nature out in the woods. You've got many days of battery life there that you can reserve and use in reserve mode. So really, really impressive there. One other thing I did like and dislike at the same time about these is the on and off buttons here in the front. Both the 800 and the 425 are really quite elevated. It is easy to find those with your gloves on even, but it's pretty exaggerated in how tall these buttons are here for the on-off buttons. 325 was a better balance in my mind, as far as that's still very defined and easy to find that button, but it's not quite as elevated and it's not quite as prone to getting turned on accidentally. So there's a plus and a minus there as far as the way the buttons are designed. Now, on the way that these articulate forward and back, I found that the 800 unfortunately was not real precise, and it had a tendency to want to come back on me a little bit, so I found myself adjusting that from time to time if I was having bumping around running or hiking or whatnot in those activities. Sometimes, not very often, but occasionally I would find that I needed to readjust that. The 425 was definitely more distinct in the way that it clicked through the different options, and it has more detents, more indentations in that, so you have more options as far as how much of an angle there, and they seem to be a little more resistant to moving. Whereas on the 800 here, there's just 2 options here as far as two different locations that you can move this to. Of course, all the way up like that, and then one there, and then one all the way forward. So it wasn't my favorite setup on the 800, even though I did really like this lamp. I wish there was a little more defined and a little more resistant to moving there, and it just a little bit more defined clicks like you get in the 425 and the 325. So just one thing that I noticed here on the 800 that wasn't my favorite in that particular headlamp. Now, I really like the run forever option with both the 800 and the 425. Really, really nice there. That's something that can be a huge time saver and life saver, so you don't have to stop and charge your phone. You can just plug it into your external power source if you find yourself in a situation where that might be something that you need. The reserve mode on both of these is nice, particularly on the 800. Performance was incredible there. And like I mentioned earlier, they don't bounce when you're out there using them. The headlamps themselves do a really good job of staying where you leave them. One thing I didn't love is that you don't have direct access to a red light. So if you're wanting to use these in a situation where that matters, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does. If you want to go straight to a red light and not, say if you're out hiking or whatnot, not spook animals, by cycling through a white light, there's no way to do that unless you turn the light off when it's already on the red light setting. Then it'll come back on with the saved setting where you left it off. So that would be nice to have that option, but currently it's not available there. So those are the Biolite headlamps. They're all very nice and have their own feature set depending on what you need in a headlamp. If you don't need long run time, this 325 is nice and lightweight. Whereas if you need longer run time, this 800 is excellent that way. If you might be out for multiple days or a weekend, that's definitely one to take a look at. And this 425 is kind of right in the middle, a great lightweight option that gives you extended run time and some extra features, but not quite as much as that 800 Pro. So drop any questions or comments down in the comment section. Happy to help if we can. Again, I'll put links to all these down in the description for you so you can check them out for yourself. Thanks for watching here today, and we will see you next time.